Hello there and welcome to the Week in Parliament, where after a 7-year wait, the Chilcot report into the Iraq War is finally published.
Sir John finds that at crucial points, Mr Blair sent personal notes and made important commitments to Mr Bush that had not been discussed or agreed with Cabinet colleagues.
The tragedy is that while the governing class got it so horrifically wrong, many of our people actually got it right.
When will UK governments of either Tory or Labour hue actually start learning from the mistakes of the past so we are not condemned to repeat them?
There are calls for reassurances that EU nationals will be able to stay in post-Brexit Britain.
They are welcome, they are necessary, they are a vital part of our society.
And the Health Secretary says he'll impose a new contract on junior doctors after they reject the latest deal. The opposition urges a rethink.
Public opinion is not on the government's side. It is evident that the public will have faith in its doctors long after they have lost faith in this or any other government.
But first, 7 years after starting work, the former senior civil servant Sir John Chilcot delivered his inquiry's report into the decision to go to war in Iraq. Sir John said that in total more than 200 British citizens died as a result of the conflict, and at least 150,000 Iraqis had been killed by 2009 as a result of the invasion and the instability that it caused. The report concluded that the UK went to war before the peace process was exhausted. The information produced by the intelligence agencies was flawed and that the post-war planning was inadequate. The Prime Minister, David Cameron, set out the findings to MPs.
The report clearly reflects that the advice given to the government by the intelligence and policy community was that Saddam did indeed continue to possess and seek to develop these capabilities. However, as we now know, by 2003, this long-held belief no longer reflected the reality. Sir John says that, and I quote, "At no stage was the proposition that Iraq might no longer have chemical, biological or nuclear weapons or programmes identified and examined either by the JIC, the Joint Intelligence Committee, or the policy community." And as the report notes, the late Robin Cook had shown it was possible to come to a different conclusion from an examination of the same intelligence. Sir John finds that at crucial points, Mr Blair sent personal notes and made important commitments to Mr Bush that had not been discussed or agreed with Cabinet colleagues. However, while Sir John makes many criticisms of process, including the way information was handled and presented, at no stage does he explicitly say that there was a deliberate attempt to mislead people.
As for planning after the initial operation, Sir John had concluded,
the government, and here I mean officials in the military as well as ministers, remain too fixed on assumptions that the Americans had a plan, that the UN would play a significant role with international community sharing the burden, and that the UK role would be over 3 to 4 months after the conflict had ended. Many of the failures in this report were not directly about the conduct of armed forces as they went into Iraq, but rather the failures of planning before a shot was fired. Overall, Sir John finds that the policy of Her Majesty's government fell far short of meeting its strategic objectives and helped to create a space for Al-Qaeda.
Jeremy Corbyn said the invasion of Iraq was the most significant decision taken by a British government in modern times.
The war was not in any way, as Sir John Chilcot says, a last resort. Frankly, it was an act of military aggression launched on a false pretext, as the inquiry accepts, and has long been regarded as illegal by the overwhelming weight of international legal opinion. The decision to invade Iraq in 2003 on the basis of what the Chilcot report calls, and I quote, flawed intelligence about the weapons of mass destruction has had a far-reaching impact on us all. It's led to a fundamental breakdown in trust in politics and in our institutions of government. The tragedy is that while the governing class got it so horrifically wrong, many of our people actually got it right. Many, on February the 15th, 2003, 1.5 million, spanning the entire political spectrum, and tens and millions of other people across the world, marched against the impending war, the biggest ever demonstration in British history. We need to reflect very seriously before we take any decisions, again, to take military action without realising the consequences of those will live with all of us for many decades to come and have often incalculable consequences as a result.
I hope and I expect that in the months ahead there will be the opportunity to hold to account those who are associated and responsible with taking the UK to war in Iraq that has only caused hundreds and thousands of deaths. Not just that, it has undermined people's faith in Parliament and government in the UK and left an indelible stain on Britain's standing in the world.
The Lib Dem leader turned to the role of his predecessor, Charles Kennedy, who led much of the opposition to the invasion.
Will the Prime Minister now take the opportunity, on behalf of his party and this House, to acknowledge that Charles Kennedy was right all along in leading the opposition across this country against the counterproductive war? And should not those who accuse Charles Kennedy of appeasement, some of whom are still on these benches today, apologise to him, to his family, to our servicemen and women, to our country and to the people of Iraq?
People who voted for the war, like me, have to take their share of responsibility. That's important, but I don't think it's right to accuse people who voted against of appeasement.
Each of us, in Cabinet or in this House, who are responsible and should take responsibility for our own individual decisions, albeit taken in good faith on the basis of evidence before us. But equally, does he agree that the men of hatred and death in Al-Qaeda and Daesh ISIL should take responsibility for their actions and for the blood and horror that they inflict on others?
Saddam Hussein and his murderous sons had spent 13 years running rings around the United Nations, ignoring 17 UN resolutions, including resolutions calling for all necessary means to stop him. Wasn't that the main issue in that debate? And has the Prime Minister found any evidence whatsoever of any lies told to Parliament on that day?
I can't see in here an accusation of deliberately deceiving people, but there's certainly information that wasn't properly presented, different justifications given before and subsequently for the action that was taken, and a number of other criticisms about processes. But deliberate deceit, I can't find a reference to it.
Sir John has been very careful about avoiding accusing the previous Prime Minister of lying to the House, but a lot of the evidence here suggests he did.
Parts of the Ministry of Defence, including the Chiefs of Staff, were not delivering the advice that the government needed, and elements of the Foreign Office had succumbed to a form of groupthink that leaves me deeply concerned as to the structure and advice governments can get.
Given this, the undermining of the UN and the disastrous and horrible consequences, is it not inconceivable that Mr Blair should not be held to account for his actions?
This is not a day for soundbites, but does the Prime Minister not agree that the hand of history should be feeling somebody's collar?
I don't think it is a grey wash or a whitewash or anything else wash. I think this, from what I've seen so far, is a thorough effort at trying to understand the narrative of the events, the decisions that were taken, and the mistakes that were made. And I think there's a huge amount to learn, and I think everyone who has played a part in it has to take their responsibility for it.
Many of those who were in Tony Blair's cabinet at the time are now in the House of Lords.
Will he perhaps join me in recognising three certainties that have emerged from his report? First, that there was no falsification of the intelligence. Second, that the cabinet was not deceived. And third, that there was no undisclosed plan between the Prime Minister and the President of the United States to go to war before the processes of government were invoked.
I welcome the report. I will study it carefully. We will learn the lessons. But at the end of the day, it is elected ministers who must exercise their judgment on some of these questions.
John Reid on the Chilcot report. Well, of course, the other big story of the week was the continuing fallout from the UK's vote to leave the EU. On Monday, the Chancellor told MPs his plans to cut corporation tax would show the UK was still open for business. George Osborne said that nothing positive would come from looking back in anger.
In my view, the strongest signal we could send the world that Britain, after this referendum, is open to the world and ready to do business would be to cut corporation tax still further. We should aim for a rate of 15% and preferably lower, because if you are pro-business, you are pro-jobs, pro-living standards and pro-working people.
That a lack of planning for a leave vote is becoming evident across all policy areas. Instead of a clear plan of action, so far we've had a series of ad hoc statements and announcements, and these included, yes, the grateful abandonment of the Brexit budget, which was to increase sharply the level of austerity being applied. The fiscal surplus target has been abandoned, and today the Chancellor has announced planned reductions in the headline rate of corporation tax. Rather than ad hoc announcements, we need a framework for economic decision-making.
When it comes to planning, let me say this. First of all, there have been extensive contingency plans in place to deal with financial market disorder as a result of a leave vote. The fact we are not debating that today shows that those contingency plans have been effective. We remain vigilant, but they were in place.
Will he today rule out any plans to claw back potential losses in revenue yield from the cut in corporation tax in the absence of behavioural change through the mechanism of further attacks on the welfare budget?
The overall message and the very clear message from the Business Council, the Prime Minister's Business Council, which met on Thursday, was let us send a message out round the world that we are not closed for business, we're not turning our back on the world, we are open to business and we're reaching out to the world.
The government suffered a defeat in the Commons on Wednesday over the fate of EU nationals living in the UK. It was a debate that saw Boris Johnson speak in the Commons for the first time since the referendum. A prominent figure in the Leave campaign, he had been one of the favourites to replace David Cameron as Conservative leader and Prime Minister, until fellow Brexiteer Michael Gove cast doubt on his suitability. The motion in front of MPs said that the British government should guarantee that anyone from an EU country should be allowed to stay.
I think it is absolutely right to issue the strongest possible reassurance to EU nationals in this country, not just for moral or humanitarian reasons, but for very, very sound economic reasons as well. They are welcome, they are necessary, they are a vital part of our society, and I will be passionately supporting this motion tonight.
The Shadow Home Secretary urged other MPs to back Labour's motion.
We can send a message out from this Parliament today to Europe and the rest of the world. Yes, people have expressed frustrations about the EU, but our country and its people have not changed. We are still that same place that has been renowned the world over for doing the fair and right thing, for doing the decent thing.
We fully expect that the legal status of EU nationals living in the UK and that of UK nationals in EU member states will be properly protected. Given that both the UK and EU want to maintain a close relationship, we are confident that we will work together and that both EU and British citizens will be protected through reciprocal arrangements.
But when it came to the vote, MPs backed Labour's motion calling on the government to give EU nationals currently living in the UK the right to remain. The result, however, isn't binding on the government. Meanwhile, up on the committee corridor, the Foreign Affairs Committee is hearing from senior ministers following the Leave vote. First up, the man preparing the ground for the Brexit negotiations. Oliver Letwin has been appointed to head a special unit at the Cabinet Office dedicated to the task. The committee chair suggested it had been a dereliction of duty that contingency plans for a Leave victory had not been put in place.
You're the one left holding the baby.
I can only say that the baby is being firmly held and that my intention is the baby should prosper, because I care about the baby in question. It is, in fact, our country.
Right.
But what was the point of the work if it wasn't binding on the new Prime Minister?
We're not making any recommendations. There's no question of them abiding by anything. We are providing a basis for them to make decisions. There's a very, very important distinction. When you ask the question, is it worth doing that, my answer is absolutely. I would have speculated a week ago that it was abundantly worthwhile. I can now tell you after a week of very intensive effort that it is totally necessary to do and abundantly worthwhile, for sure.
Oliver Letwin. On Thursday, it was the turn of the Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, to appear in front of the MPs. The committee thought the Foreign Office budget would need to double or triple to cope with the change.
I don't think it is remotely realistic to talk about
and
a
as
doubling.
The Foreign Secretary,
to talk about a doubling or trebling
the budget of the Foreign
budget.
Office is a minute proportion of overall government expenditure. It's your view that the Foreign Office should continue to suffer that level of austerity, despite the fact our diplomatic position and role in the world has completely changed, and the scale of challenge faced the United Kingdom diplomatically has gone off the scale.
We may indeed need to bid for additional resource to deal with specific pressures that arise. What I'm saying to the committee is that I don't think in the economic and fiscal circumstances that the country is likely to face over the coming few years, talk of doubling or trebling departmental budgets is remotely realistic.
Philip Hammond. At the end of the week in the House of Lords, the former Labour MP, Una, now Lady King, was calling for a second referendum once the UK had negotiated the terms of its withdrawal.
In the interests of democracy, the British people must be given the chance to vote on the deal to leave the EU once we finally know what that deal is and what that deal costs in terms of our economy, our jobs, our pensions, our future, our global influence, our geographical borders, and last but certainly not least, our precious identity as a tolerant, open-facing nation. I say, let the people decide.
But other peers disagreed.
The only way that we can have a second bite at this cherry is to have a political party with its main aim in its manifesto commitment not to break with the EU and test that at a general election.
I simply say to the House, particularly I say to this House, of which I'm very, very fond, this is essentially an advisory House. The public's not an advisory public. The public have made their decision. And for this House, particularly, I'd say it to my friends at the other end, amongst whom I see no appetite for another referendum whatsoever. But I do say it to my friends in this House, it really isn't our job to thwart the will of the British people.
A former Conservative MP put it more bluntly.
Dear God, wasn't one enough? Do we really want another one? I can't believe that people would want another one. The British people were not deluded. They knew what they were doing. They voted to leave.
We're now told, well, let's have negotiations, a full negotiated package, and we'll put that package before the public. My concern, my lords, then is, again, if the public said they didn't agree with that, there would be an attempt to rerun and rerun and rerun. There is this core issue we have to be really worried about, my lords. As politicians, we must re-engage with the public. They have shown that they have got distrust in the political elite. We can increase that disgust if we keep saying to people, keep on voting and you do what we want. That's not the way we operate. And I know it's not what the noble lady wants.
Now let's take a look at some of the other news from around Westminster in brief. The Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has said the government will impose a new contract on junior doctors in England. It follows their decision to reject the latest deal by 58% to 42%, leading to the resignation of the chairman of the BMA's Junior Doctors Committee. Jeremy Hunt told MPs the new deal had won the support of the majority of the Royal Colleges in the health service.
Unfortunately, because of the vote, we are now left in a no man's land that, if it continues, can only damage the NHS. An elected government whose main aim is to improve the safety and quality of care for patients has come up against a union which has stirred up anger amongst its own members. It is now unable to pacify.
Labour urged the government to reconsider.
It has not helped for the government to treat junior doctors like the enemy within. It has not helped their morale to imply at one time that the only barrier to a 7-day NHS is their reluctance to work weekends, when so many of them are already working unsocial hours, sacrificing family life in the process. Public opinion is not on the government's side. It is not too late to change course.
The government called on Labour to condemn a teachers' strike which closed schools on Tuesday. The strike was called by the National Union of Teachers as part of a dispute over school funding, pay and conditions.
The industrial action by the NUT is pointless, but it is far from inconsequential. It disrupts children's education, it inconveniences parents, and it damages the profession's reputation in the eyes of the public.
Will the Minister now accept that class sizes are increasing, pupils are getting less choice about the subjects they can learn today, and jobs are going and children are now getting less individual time with staff?
Southern Railway is temporarily cutting 341 trains a day from the service it provides. The announcement follows weeks of problems caused by industrial action and a shortage of train crews. Appearing before MPs, the company's boss faced some tough questions.
You've already admitted that 40% of the delays are your direct responsibility and you've been fined. And only this morning there's been an official announcement of hundreds of services cut in a very abrupt manner. There doesn't seem to have been any consultation at all about which those services are and just what is happening. Are you fit to be running this railway?
Yes, we are fit, if I may. We are fit to be running this railway. We're in the middle of an extremely difficult moment in the franchise at this stage. It is a difficult and challenging franchise anyway, but the problems over the last few weeks, following the industrial action taken by the RMT conductors, have added to some challenging circumstances which are inherent in this franchise.
The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has told MPs that he will not tolerate anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. He was being questioned by the Home Affairs Committee, which is investigating whether prejudice against the Jewish community has increased. The Labour Party has published a report into anti-Semitism, sparked by remarks made by the former London Mayor, Ken Livingstone.
Ken Livingstone made remarks that are wholly unacceptable and totally wrong. They were drawn to the attention of the party compliance unit very rapidly. A decision was made within a very few hours to suspend his party membership. He is now, the remarks are now being investigated by the party, and due process will take place.
Sad, shocked and insecure. Those are the three words that the President of the Board of Deputies chose when asked in this committee 2 weeks ago about how he felt when he heard of Mr Livingstone's comments, your friend Ken. There are 300,000 Jewish people in this country. Are you upset that you and your friend have upset them in this way?
Ken Livingstone has been suspended from party membership following the remarks that he made. So obviously, we have taken action as a party.
MPs have been sharing some appalling examples of abuse they and their constituents have encountered from people on social media sites, such as Facebook and Twitter. The Commons was debating how to deal with the bullies who use the anonymity available online to hurl abuse and make threats. One MP described how she'd been reduced to tears by hurtful insults.
So I came here with the full knowledge and expectation that my words and actions will be held up to public scrutiny, and that is right. What has sometimes taken my breath away, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, shocked my family and reduced me to tears, is the vitriolic, hateful and sometimes criminal levels of personal abuse that I and indeed colleagues across this House have faced.
This debate today is about enabling Parliament to send a clear message to the industry, to social media and to the online world to say enough is enough.
One occasion which I simply posted online some comments about some boy racers who were causing considerable antisocial behaviour, and within about an hour I was being abused from all round the globe by boy racers who had obviously noticed a deficit in my sex life and were offering a wide range of suggestions to improve this, some of which actually would end in certain death.
The final two in the Conservative leadership contest have been revealed. The Home Secretary, Theresa May, will face the Energy Minister, Andrea Leadsom, in the runoff after the Justice Secretary, Michael Gove, was eliminated from the contest. On Wednesday, Westminster had heard the unguarded opinions of two senior Conservatives who were chatting in a Sky News TV studio. Talking to Sir Malcolm Rifkin, the veteran Tory MP Ken Clarke described the Home Secretary Theresa May as a bloody difficult woman, suggested that Andrea Leadsom didn't really want to leave the EU and branded Michael Gove as wild. His comments were picked up by the shadow leader of the Commons, who paid tribute to Ken Clarke, the MP for Rushcliffe.
This week we were very grateful to him for giving us the vital intelligence that the three remaining candidates for the leadership of the Tory party, that one of them was bloody difficult. One doesn't expect to deliver on the extremely stupid things she's been saying, and one would declare war on at least 3 countries.
He wanted Ken Clarke, who's 76, to make a late bid for the leadership.
Could I perhaps to suggest to him, if the member for Rushcliffe is reluctant because he is of a certain age of returning to the dispatch box, I've got to remind him, well, I've discovered that the dispatch box is a vital support and a wonderful alternative to a Zimmer frame.
Well, Mr Flynn's government oppo, Chris Grayling, suggested all this was just jealousy, as Labour was desperate for a leadership contest and couldn't organise one. And that's it for now. But do join Christina Cooper on Monday night at 11 for another roundup of the day here at Westminster. But until then, from me, Alicia McCarthy, goodbye.